We want to acknowledge that the Canada Council for the Arts offices in Ottawa are located on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. The Council recognizes the Algonquins as the customary keepers and defenders of the Ottawa River watershed and its tributaries. We honor their long history of welcoming many nations to this beautiful territory and uphold and uplift the voice and values of our host nation. The Council also respects and affirms the inherent and treaty rights of all Indigenous peoples across this land. It has and will continue to honor the commitments to self determination and sovereignty we have made to the Indigenous nations and peoples. Furthermore, the Council acknowledges the historical oppression of lands, cultures, and the original peoples in what we now know as Canada, and fervently believes the arts contribute to the healing and decolonizing journey that we all share together. And on that theme of sharing, we invite you to also reflect on the land you live and work on, the nation it belongs to, and how you can acknowledge that in your own way, either as an organization or as individuals. This can be done through engagement, knowledge sharing, and like today, acknowledgement. It is important to be open and engaged with the many nations of this land. So, welcome. The Canada Council for the Arts is proud to be Canada's public arts funder. The Council contributes to the vibrancy of a creative and diverse arts and literary scene. And we're proud to introduce to you today the new updated portal, where for the first time, grant and prize funding opportunities will be available in one place with a one-stop application process designed to better serve applicants. Some other important information before we begin. We will send a PDF version of this slide presentation to all attendees in a few days. Due to the time limitations and for the sake of focus, there will not be a Q&A during this presentation. And for questions, you're welcome to contact the Circulation and Touring team via the help function in the updated portal or by email. And please note the information in these slides and that we're presenting today is accurate at the time of delivery, but may be updated as new considerations arise. For the most current details on programs and related processes, please consult the Council's website and list of resources. And there will be some more resources at the end as well. So my name is Nicole Levine. I am a white woman with brown curly hair, wearing purple glasses and a purple t-shirt. I am a program officer in Arts Across Canada and Abroad program, and I work on the circulation and touring component.
And hello, everybody. My name is Philippe Lafrenière. I am a program officer as well here at Canada Council for the Arts. I have dark black hair, black glasses, and wearing a blue shirt with a white collar. And I will be joining you a little further on down the presentation to share with you a little bit more on the application process. Thanks, Nicole.
So our agenda for this meeting, we're going to start off by looking at the updated portal, changes and improvements. Then we'll go into the new guidelines for the updated circulation and touring component. We'll also go through an introductory tour of the updated portal and application and a bit of how to prepare your application. We'll also discuss peer assessment and the decision-making process. And then finally, share some resources and closing remarks. So first off, the updated portal changes and improvements. So the Canada Council for the Arts has modernized its granting systems, programs, and processes. You can see here the link to the updated portal. You may have noticed that if you had the old link saved, or the button that used to be on our website is not there, it is a new site, and because we've been doing a phased rollout of access, that will be coming to the website in a more prominent place in the coming weeks. This new portal is going to be your one-stop location for searching our available funding and awards, creating and managing accounts for yourself, your groups, and your organizations, submitting, managing, and tracking your applications and nominations, accept, decline, and report on your awarded funds, managing and tracking a case with our support team, and finding help at any point in your journey, as well as much more. So, some highlights of what's changing with the circulation and touring component. We've merged the Arts Across Canada and Arts Abroad programs and are now offering circulation and touring as a unified funding opportunity that supports both national and international activity. So, some key differences are that we have removed the 250-kilometer minimum distance requirement that used to exist in Arts Across Canada. We're also removing the 3-stop minimum for national tours. And we are also removing the $150 daily cap on per diem and accommodations. So now you'll be able to enter in the amount that you need for those expenses. Our application limits and grant amounts have been increased. So you'll now be able to apply up to 6 times per calendar year. You can request up to a maximum of $200,000 per application, and you can receive up to a maximum of $400,000 per year for your combined grants. One thing that is staying the same is that self-presentation is eligible only for circulation and touring activities within Canada. So this still is not eligible for tours that are only international. We're going to go over the new guidelines for the updated component. And in case anyone here is unfamiliar with Arts Across Canada and Abroad and the circulation touring program, we're also going to do a little overview. So, Arts Across Canada and Arts Abroad, connecting Canadian artists to audiences and the world. The Arts Across Canada and Abroad program fosters meaningful relationships and exchanges between artists and the Canadian public and celebrates the creativity, innovation, and excellence of Canadian artists by helping to bring Canadian works to the world. Artists, arts professionals, groups, and arts organizations can apply to present and share artistic work with diverse communities across the country and around the world. The new circulation and touring component is part of the Arts Across Canada and Arts Abroad program. It funds the circulation and touring of artists, exhibitions, and artistic works and activities linked to artistic exchange and networking for Canadian artists, artistic groups, and arts organizations. These grants support the presentation and exhibition of performances and works by Canadian artists, which build national or international exposure. So, circulation and touring is one of our project grants. As I mentioned, you will be able to submit up to 6 applications per year, per calendar year for this component. So from January 1st to December 31st. You can request up to a maximum of $200,000 per application, though this can represent a maximum of 50% of your total eligible costs. And you can receive up to a maximum of $400,000 per calendar year across your combined grants. At present, the next application deadline is October 8th, and the circulation and touring component will open soon in the portal. In the event that there might be further delays, there is the possibility that this deadline be moved further to allow applicants ample time to create their accounts, familiarize themselves with the new portal, and prepare applications. So we encourage you to sign up to Council's mailing list and consult the various resources provided at the end of this presentation so that you have the most up-to-date information. Please note, though, that applications must be submitted by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. So this is different to in the past when that timeline was based on the West Coast. And the notification of results for circulation touring is usually within 6 months of the application deadline. We are aware that this response time is slower than before. This is to allow for staff who are also learning the new systems and for potential changes to our volume of applications that we receive. As always, we release the results as soon as we are able to when they are finalized, and we will be able to reevaluate this timeline in the future to reflect how long it actually takes. But we've put in a little bit of extra time just to account for some of those changes. So, eligibility, who can apply? This includes artists and arts workers, First Nations, Inuit, or Métis artists or arts/cultural workers, artistic groups, First Nations, Inuit, or Métis groups or collectives, artistic organizations, presenting organizations, First Nations, Inuit, or Métis not-for-profit organizations, and foreign arts festivals, biennales, or book fairs can apply for destinations outside of Canada. One other change with the new portal is that you will no longer need to submit a profile for validation before you apply for a grant. You can submit a profile along with your grant application, and it will be validated then. Your eligibility for the grant is still determined by your profile. And organizations presently receiving core or operating grants can also apply to this component. So, eligible activities. What can you apply for? So, this is the circulation or touring of artists, exhibitions, or artistic works to one or more destination. Examples of eligible activities include exhibitions, presentations, reading events, workshops, performances, and screenings. And now in this one component, you will be able to apply for travel within Canada, outside of Canada, or that is a combination of within Canada and abroad. Ineligible activities. So here's some examples of things that you cannot apply for. This is the circulation or touring of artistic works or activities that are not your own or that you do not have the rights to present, circulate, or tour. Presenting artists or artworks at your own venue, festival, or event in Canada. For this type of activity, please check out our public outreach component. You can't apply for circulation or touring abroad without financial contribution from a foreign presenter, partner, or host organization. And projects that are self-presented are not eligible outside of Canada. So, what expenses are eligible? Direct costs related to the activity are eligible, including professional fees for artists, honoraria for elders and knowledge keepers, project management fees, touring production and exhibition expenses, venue, studio, or facility rental costs. So this is only eligible for self-presentation destinations within Canada. Pre-tour production expenses are only eligible for remounting existing work. Accommodation and per diems, transportation, additional shipping or baggage costs, visa expenses and travel insurance, promotional expenses, safety-related expenses, and child or dependent care expenses if they are required to complete your activity. So about the project start date, You can apply any time before your departure date. Pre-tour activities that take place before this date can also be included in your budget for remounting existing works. As noted on our updates to funding opportunities and portal page, we will also exceptionally be accepting retroactive expenses incurred between March 26th and October 22nd of 2025. So if your tour started during that period, and even if it has already ended, you can still apply. If you miss the October 8th deadline, you will still be able to apply retroactively. And note, when determining your project start date, individuals should be aware that according to Canada Revenue Agency, expenses occurred in the year immediately before a grant is received are only deductible from the grant if they are incurred after the artist has received notification that the grant will be paid. For more information about income taxes and your grant, please refer to our website. So, eligibility criteria for tours with national travel destinations, either Canada only or mostly in Canada. These tours require a minimum of one stop, and projects that are self-presented are eligible for activities within Canada. You cannot apply for activities that occur before your project start date, unless it's part of the retroactive expenses period. Activities that receive funding under another Canada Council program, or those that are on the general list of ineligible activities, which can be found on our website. And then for tours with international travel destinations, either outside Canada only or mostly outside of Canada, these tours also require a minimum of one stop, and they require at least one international presenter. And at least one international presenter, partner, or host organization must contribute financially to the exhibition or tour. So this can include the payment of performance or exhibition fees to the presenting artists, groups, or organization, providing a share of the admission fees or box office sales, or in exceptional circumstances, an in-kind contribution to accommodation or other touring expenses. Exceptional circumstances can be cases such as traveling to a country that has very minimal art funding and is therefore unable to pay artist fees, or countries that have restrictions about paying artist fees to international artists. And even though an international presenter or partner must be contributing financially, your events can still be offered free to the public. So, the assessment criteria. How are decisions made? Your application will be assessed by a peer assessment committee representing a discipline or group of disciplines based on the following three weighted criteria, and you must receive a minimum score in each category to be considered for a grant. Each assessment criteria is also broken down into sub-criteria with scores for each. The first criteria is impact, which weighs 40% of the total score. This is the potential of the project to enhance the public's appreciation of the arts, the potential of the project to develop and enhance your profile or that of Canadian artists or your arts practice, and the potential of the project to generate future opportunities for you or the artists involved. And for impact, you require a minimum score of 25 out of 40 to be considered for a grant. The second criteria is artistic, with a weight of 30%. For this, assessors will evaluate the artistic quality of the work and the suitability of the work for destination markets. And this criteria has a minimum score of 15 out of 30. And the third assessment criteria is feasibility with a weight of 30%. This is your experience and capacity to undertake the project, the experience, quality, and contribution of the partners or host organizations, and a reasonable budget that demonstrates other revenue sources, fair payment to participants, and efficient use of resources. And for efficient use of resources, committees often look at how the grant money will be used, such as, is the budget inflated? Are the costs reasonable for the project and its scale? Or if there is a rationale for any expenses that seem higher than would be typical. And the minimum score for feasibility is 15 out of 30. There is one other additional criteria, which is the respectful and ethical cultural and artistic practice. So your application must satisfy this criterion in order to receive funding, either by demonstrating proper attention is paid to First Nations, Inuit, or Métis cultural protocols and cultural materials are treated in a respectful way, or there is no Indigenous content in your activities. Next, we're going to move into an introductory tour of the updated portal and application. So even if you had an active account in the portal before, you will need to create a new account in the updated portal. Your application history will then be transferred and be visible to you in the updated portal. If you use the same email address as was associated with your previous account, this will transfer the information automatically. And you can get help with your application. So individuals, or if the lead applicant for a group self-identifies as an artist who is deaf, hard of hearing, has a disability, or is living with a mental illness, or a First Nations, Inuit, or Métis artist facing language, geographic, and or cultural barriers, then they may be eligible for application assistance to help cover costs for services that support the application or nomination process. For information about this, please visit application assistance on our website. And now I'm going to hand things over to my colleague, Philippe.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nicole. We will now walk you through a bit of a bird's eye view of what to expect with the application process itself, in particular for the circulation and touring component. So once applicants have signed up and access their accounts through the portal, they will locate the program they wish to apply for, in this case, circulation and touring. And their first stop will be this checklist of 4 items. And they will have to navigate them sequentially in order to proceed and get to the application form here at the bottom, the fourth of those 4 steps. So firstly, it will be basic account information, moving on to self-identification, applicant profile, and then lastly, the application form itself. Once applicants begin their application form, they'll navigate through roughly what will be about 12 steps that might vary depending on some of the options they select, and of course will change, with other programs they might be applying to at Canada Council. So these steps are 1, basic information, 2, destination, 3, overview, destinations in Canada, 4, overview, destinations outside of Canada, 5, activity description, 6, respectful and ethical cultural and artistic practices, 7, activity plan, 8, activity timeline, 9, budget, 10 last details, 11 support materials, and 12 declaration. So I'm going to walk you through more specifically what these various steps will look like. So as a first step, applicants are requested to populate the form with basic information giving their application a name, as well as a short summary of the proposed project. So for example, Group X Fall 2026 European Tour or similar. Applicants will also select their field of practice, otherwise known as their discipline. So this could be music, visual arts, dance, theater, and so on, as well as the type of activity that they're proposing, whether that be an exhibition, presentation, circulation of an artistic work, let's say in the case of a visual arts application, or touring of artists in the case of maybe a band on tour or a dance or theater group touring a particular production. You will notice that to the right here, you'll see helpful information, something we also refer to as knowledge articles. So this is a helpful hints section that has some key information on eligible expenses, assessment criteria, and at times sort of tips, tricks, or considerations for applicants when responding to some of the questions that they will see here. So this has replaced the guidelines that used to run in parallel to our programs. They're now embedded into this integrated application approach here. So we will move on to step 2. So for step 2, Nicole had pointed to this earlier, but applicants will designate which of the following options best describes their proposed project. So in this case, it could be a tour or circulation of works in Canada only, outside Canada only, mostly Canada, or mostly outside Canada. So that allows for, of course, the option of mixed tours with multiple legs where, you know, an applicant may be coming in and out of Canada, but also be presenting their work abroad. So on step 3, once an applicant designates the destination for their tour, they will move on to activities, the activities overview page, where they'll input specific information on each date, location, type of activity for any given performance, date, exhibition while on tour or circulating works. Depending on the tour designation they selected prior, the respective sections for destinations in or outside Canada will populate accordingly. So if you're doing only a tour inside Canada, you might not have this next step designating the destinations outside of Canada. Applicants will add their first date. So we see here city, province, territory, country. They will give a brief description of the activity taking place. They will input their start date and their end date. And when they move on to their next date, they will, to the top right there, click that add button and then repeat the process for additional dates for as many dates as they have. Once they've done so, they'll move on to step 4, which in this case would include dates outside of Canada. And they would effectively just repeat that process for those dates. So moving on to step 5, the activity description. So once an applicant lands on the activity description page, they will describe their proposed activities. So this is really where the first narrative portion of the application comes into play. And I would say where the helpful information section will provide especially useful guidance on the information that council and peer assessors would be looking for. In this section, applicants will typically describe who they are, what they do, give us a broad overview of the proposal, providing a strong rationale for the destinations, for example, describing the opportunities that are part of this proposal, the partners that they're working with, and so on and so forth. You'll notice as well that there's a character count maximum, so there will be a flag there if an applicant were to go over, at which point they can, tailor their responses accordingly. The other thing to possibly take note of would be in this helpful hint section, you will notice a flag there or some text pointing an applicant to specifically what part of the criteria a question is pointing to. So it could be a value to go back to the weighted criteria, unpack that further, and then tailor those responses to what you will effectively be scored on when you're responding to these questions. That will then take us on to step 6. So upon completing the activity description section, applicants will navigate to the respectful and ethical, cultural, and artistic practices section, where they will indicate whether or not their project includes the participation of intellectual property, cultural knowledge of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis individuals and communities. Applicants responding yes to any of these questions will need to provide additional information when a text box appears as a result. Applicants responding no will just simply move on with their application to the next steps. Again, that helpful information will provide further guidance as to what's expected in answering these questions. And as Nicole pointed out, this becomes very much an important part of the application. So it is certainly suggested, as per the helpful information section, that applicants take great care in demonstrating authentic and respectful efforts in engaging with participants from these communities, including how they intend to navigate Indigenous protocols, principles of intellectual property, and harm reduction strategies where applicable. So once an applicant completes that section on respectful and ethical, cultural, and artistic practices, they move on to the activity plan. So the activity plan here is where they will indicate whether or not they're, activity plan. So they'll answer essentially, you'll answer a series of questions on the expected outcomes and proposed of the proposed tour and exhibition. So applicants will typically describe how they plan to connect with their audience, what experience and capacity they have in relation to what they're proposing, and will describe the experience and capacity also of the presenters, partners, collaborators involved in the project, and further define those roles and involvement in the tour. As a reminder, self-presented activities are only eligible within Canada, so should this be the case, applicants might sort of further describe their own capacity and experience in self-presenting their work and sharing any details on the venues or locations where they would be presenting that work. In the case of international tours where they're required to be working with presenting partners, then applicants should instead describe the relevance and experience and capacity of those presenters or host organizations in connection with the tour. Okay, so that has us move on now to the activity timeline. Applicants move on to the activity timeline in which they make their best efforts really at identifying and communicating the various logical steps that they intend to map out and follow as a means of obtaining their objectives and desired project outcomes. So again, as I pointed to earlier, assessment criteria for this section, in this case, this is pointing an applicant directly to feasibility criteria. So that might point to their capacity to take on these proposed activities and may be worth looking at to sort of inject a little bit of that in the strategy with regards to the response there. Okay, so completing the activity timeline, applicants now move on to the budget. So this is really an essential element of the application, and it's now fully integrated into the application form itself. This helpful hints section will serve to remind applicants about the limits, application limits, maximum amounts, as well as eligible costs. And point them to also make use of budget notes where they can in connection with particular line items with their revenues and expenses that we'll see in a moment. In order to move forward here, applicants will simply click that complete budget button and that icon will have an integrated budget form appear as a pop-up. All right, so when this budget form appears, you'll notice really that there there are two tabs. There's a revenue tab highlighted in blue that we're seeing currently, and an expenses tab. So applicants will flip between each of those functions of this integrated budget to populate this form accordingly. It's recommended really that applicants start with the expenses section first, and they will be using in both cases revenues and expenses, that initial amounts column, the first column that we're looking at there. And they will be using the last column under notes to include those budget notes that are strongly suggested that applicants use in relation to the costs that they're identifying here. The middle column is really exclusively reserved for applications that have been awarded and that will come back to council with a project update or eventually a final report. So you input your figures on the appropriate lines, add the corresponding dollar amounts, add your budget notes, and as you scroll down, you will see that there is a tally exactly here on the total requested grant amount from council, the total revenue of the tour, the total expenses of the tour, and a net surplus deficit, which should remain at zero if the budget exercise has been done correctly. So we'll give you some tips and tricks and best practices as we navigate further down through this presentation, but that's something to take note of for the time being. All right, so so when the budget form appears, applicants will be able to flip. I'm seeing I don't have my notes on this one here for this. So essentially, this is just a breakdown of the revenue tab, what applicants can expect to input in terms of information. That could be public sector revenue, so that is Canada Council revenue, but it could be from other sources. In the case of Ontario Arts Council, any of the other provincial arts councils, Factor, so on and so forth. Earned revenue would be specifically from revenue coming in from the performances or the exhibitions of the work. Private sector revenue could be sponsorships, contributions of various kinds. In-kind would, of course, be no money changing hands per se, but the dollar value of the work that is being done. And on the expenses side, there would be artistic and project expenses. So that could be salaries and fees for artists and collaborators of any kind. Production, technical, and programming expenses. So that could be really a tech team or people working behind the scenes. Travel expenses, which is often a big one. Administrative marketing expenses, which could be, embedded in an arts organization's team. They can be people that are hired for the specific purposes of the tour, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that takes us then to step 10. So this is last details. This is really for any information that hasn't been covered in any of the other previous questions that we've looked at. And could be a useful section to provide additional context, whether that be regional or cultural, or any specific needs related to the activities on the tour. So that's very broad in general, but it can be sort of tailored in terms of the response based on the applicant's needs. All right, so with the bulk of the application completed, applicants now need to provide support material in connection with the proposal. So in this section, one would upload files directly, or in some cases could use web links to provide that information. Applicants will also be asked to download, fill in, and upload an appendices document that has crucial information on number of people on tour, itinerary, routing, and other important information related to the ins and outs of who may be traveling where. As far as support material goes, it should primarily include samples of an applicant's work, as well as the required minimum one letter of invitation, confirmation, intent of firm commitment from a presenting partner or host organization. The samples of the work should be sort of curated carefully and selected with a bit of care and consideration for the tour and the production that might be touring, more specifically. Letters of invitation should be as detailed as possible. So we'll get into this with best practices, but certainly the more information in the confirmations that you have with regards to fees, uh, whatever expenses might be covered by presenters, all of that can be very helpful for a peer assessment committee. As for additional documentation, there's the optional information file upload. That might be a good spot to update and include CVs, press kits, bios, PR, and marketing strategies or agreements. And essentially, we would say also, I mean, types of support material can vary depending on the nature of the work. So for visual artists, of course, we would expect to see images, possibly videos of artworks and installations, whereas in the performing arts, we might expect to see live videos and so on and so forth. We accept various file formats, and I think that will be made obvious when an applicant is uploading some of this crucial information. So once an applicant has uploaded all of their support material, they've completed that step 11, they will move on to the final step, which is the declaration. So applicants complete the application form. They confirm that they agree with the statements here listed above, that all the statements are accurate and true to the best of their knowledge. And in the case that they are applying on someone else's behalf, that they are authorized to do so and understand the roles and responsibilities in connection to having a funded project. And then they click complete and submit, and that concludes the application process itself. So from A to Z, this is pretty much what applicants can expect from any and all programs at Canada Council. All right, so we will move on to a few best practices. So these are just tips, tricks, considerations that might be helpful. Based on a lot of experience at Council and working with the peer assessment committees, applicants are no longer required to submit a CV with their applicant profile, but it's really strongly recommended that they submit them with their applications. And this can vary. If they're an individual, then they'll submit their own CV. If they're a group, it could result in multiple CVs of participating members in the group. And for an arts organization, it could be like an overview of the organization and mission statement, so on and so forth. So it would be wise to update those documents and include them as part of the optional additional support material. We also really suggest that applicants write in their own voice. I mean, third person is okay, but first person generally seems to resonate quite well with a peer assessment committee. Having someone read over the work, especially now in the age of AI and grant writers, sort of injecting the application with one's own voice, tone, and character could be of value. And lastly, of course, in terms of the application form, submitting a complete application. As Nicole mentioned earlier, by deadline date, which is now 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the day of the deadline. So if we move on to best practices for the budget, really the budget needs to balance. So essentially the total revenues and total expenses need to match after an applicant inputs the amount from Canada Council. So as an example, if a tour costs an applicant $100,000, then really they're looking at coming to council for a max of 50. And that remaining 50 would come from some of the additional sources of revenue that we pointed to. And ultimately, you would have 100,000 on the revenue side and 100,000 on the expenses side. So you don't want to be showing a surplus or a deficit as part of that exercise, and you don't want the amount requested from council to exceed 50% of the total expenses. As mentioned earlier, we really strongly suggest that applicants use budget notes to provide additional context where they can, complete the appendices document, that it will be a necessary attachment as part of the application process. When working in the budget form, we suggested earlier, it can be helpful to start with expenses. We also say that, when receiving or inputting in-kind support, especially if it is coming from additional contributions from presenters, then having that in a letter, as one would with a letter of invitation or contract, can also be of tremendous value and certainly helpful in making your application more competitive. And finally, ensure that you are paying the artists involved, and that means yourself as well. If you're included in that grant, or if you're really the lead on it, you're the lead musician, artist, participant, then the intention is that you get paid, and that is often overlooked in some of these grant applications. So ensure that you're paying yourself. Okay, so lastly, we will move on to a few best practices with support materials. So we mentioned the appendices, make sure that's complete. Letters of confirmation. In this program, while you are required to only include one minimum letter of invitation, confirmation, intent, or firm commitment, the idea really is, if you're proposing multiple dates, then submitting as many letters or contracts as you do have dates goes a far way in making your application much more competitive. So it's highly encouraged that applicants include as many letters of invitation as possible. I mentioned earlier curating carefully, so selecting support material with a purpose. Really choosing support material that best showcases or highlights what you might be doing as an artist, as a group, or as an arts organization. And there are now sections there where an applicant will upload their support material, and they do have a section where they can shed some light on why they chose that specific example. And that too is a great opportunity to tell peer assessors more about the project, about why you chose that example, about why it's relevant to the tour. So that is a great area to take into consideration there. Additional support documents, we mentioned PR, marketing strategies, confirmations from other collaborators, press kits. All of those things are otherwise a missed opportunity to tell peer assessors more about your project. We also mention highlighting pertinent audio video segments. So if you have long examples, it can be of value to identify key areas that you would like a peer assessment committee to look at. And then certainly provide accessible links that will work and will work months down the road. You don't want to be in a situation where now those links are broken or have changed, and when a peer assessor is consulting that information in the evaluation process, those links no longer work. So these are some tips, tricks, and considerations that we find ourselves sharing quite often and wanted to share with you here. So we're just closing off on the last considerations here with regards to the application process and decision-making process. So peer assessment and decision-making. Really, peer assessment is the cornerstone of most of council's decisions. Peers are selected for their diverse backgrounds and regions across Canada, their artistic and regional expertise, and their ability to work together collectively at assessing and evaluating these applications against the weighted criteria. So if you yourself have any interest in participating in this process, I've always felt that it's a great opportunity to learn more about how these decisions are made and what makes a competitive application. So applicants can now self-nominate through the portal. They're also welcome to reach out to us directly, at the general inboxes, and express their interest in participating, and we could certainly explore that further. So notification of results. So what does it mean to be awarded, funding awarded, funding not awarded? So as a result of submitting a grant, there are two scenarios: funding awarded, funding not awarded. In the case where funding is awarded, applicants will receive a notification via email and will then log into the portal and complete the necessary various steps to accept the grant, receive the funds, and move ahead with their projects. Applicants whose grants are not awarded are certainly encouraged to reach out to program officers ahead of their next applications. So that's a great opportunity to connect early where possible, and we as program officers can take the time to unpack your proposed project prior and give you some more specific tips and tricks as to how you might approach it and considerations in preparing your next application. And I would say also that sometimes the difference of where the line is drawn is really separated by decimal points. So it's important to note that many, if not most, of the applications we receive are actually excellent. When a grant is not awarded, it's more often than not still a very strong application in what was a very competitive process. So many applicants are not awarded because of limited funds allocated to a given program at a given moment in time. So it's often not a question of having done something wrong and more a question of an application benefiting from a little bit more clarity and perhaps a few small adjustments that can be made clear in reaching out to a program officer ahead of time for further clarification and guidance. So we certainly encourage you to do so. So useful resources and closing remarks. We've collected a list of useful resources that you can find through the updated portal and on the Canada Council's website. So as this deck will be shared with you, you'll be able to navigate these calmly and give yourself some time to explore some of these options. So the portal itself will be an excellent resource where you will have those knowledge articles and helpful hints and useful info. The guidance and resources page will provide some great user guidance and specifics around support materials for funding opportunities. There, we mentioned the CVs earlier, so we will have CV tips there for new applicants in particular. Other areas of Council's website could be the latest funding opportunities and portal updates. So there are changes as we navigate this new grant system. So you can find the latest information there, and of course, if you sign up to Canada Council's mailing list. We have a few other links there for upcoming deadlines and notifications, as well as upcoming info sessions that might be of value to you. So please check those out as well. Lastly, we would say that if you are going to reach out to a program officer, in particular with regard to upcoming deadlines, we encourage you to do so as early as possible, well in advance of the deadline, where you can. And we say to, attend webinar trainings where you can, complete as much of the application beforehand is very helpful. So if you're coming to us with specific questions, then we can be more specific in our responses to you. It's always helpful as well if you're writing an email to reference the file number where applicable. Other than that, we also, of course, offer any accommodations should you require any ASL interpretation or similar. So we can make necessary arrangements where applicable. And in this deck, you'll have some general information as to how to best contact Canada Council. Currently, we're still using our Arts Abroad and Arts Across Canada emails, while we transition into what will be internally a new email address to take your inquiries there. But please use the current email addresses and reach out to info@Canada Council if there's a doubt, and that will be triaged further to us. So that about covers it. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank John and Christy as well for being with us today. And we hope to hear from you soon. I mean, the door is always open, as we say, and looking forward to getting your emails, your inquiries, and having the opportunity to help you navigate through what are now some pretty exciting new opportunities at Canada Council.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.